Danny Reimer, partner at Index Ventures, has been around on the web scene forever. He's invested in Last.fm, Flipboard and Etsy, to name a few. Today, he's with us to talk about the maturity of the European scene and also what's an Unki. Danny, welcome to Tech Sessions. Danny Reimer, partner of Index Ventures. Your latest investment, Unki, slightly had its thunder stolen at launch. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, it got a little worrisome for a few seconds. Essentially what Unki is trying to do is reinvent part of the physical toy industry. So they're taking on what in the UK is known as skeletrics, and I know as slot cars. Do you remember those?
Yeah, oh god, yeah.
These cars that fly around.
Amazing.
And essentially what they've done is they've created artificial intelligence and robotics that power these cars at scale that fly around a track, and it's the equivalent of going 230 miles per hour with 3 inches of space on either side of.
And when can we buy these?
So this Christmas period, they will be available in Apple stores. But what happened was they came out. So Tim Cook introduced them in minute 6 of his keynote at WWDC. And for about 5 seconds, I was definitely worried because the car was not responding to the Bluetooth, so they had to restart it, and then it went fine.
Amazing.
So it was definitely not a canned demo. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, that sounds fascinating, and I've got 2 boys, so I'm going to be looking that up. When we look through the list of companies that you've invested in, it's all the big names from London. And the European tech scene. Last.fm, Skype, Flipboard, Etsy, it's quite impressive. What is it about the scene here that has engaged you so much?
Well, I think, we've been fortunate enough to work with incredible entrepreneurs, and hopefully that will continue. I mean, what we look for are companies that are going to disrupt their own space. And Europe, and specifically London, has been a hotbed. Actually, this whole area has been a hotbed for a lot of companies with completely innovative ideas. So we always look for the same thing. Find an entrepreneur that is willing to take risks because they're going after a global opportunity that is really going to disrupt the business model and the monopoly or oligopoly that lives. And if we find that entrepreneur and we can convince them to work with us, we're gonna always back them.
How you spot those trends or entrepreneurs is quite interesting, though. And what does that working pattern look like? Is it about meeting and talking to people? Is it about reading loads of stuff?
Yeah, it's a bit of. I mean, it's a combination of things. I think probably most of our successes have been from coming up with industries or themes that we think are ready for disruption, and digging in, trying to find out which companies and entrepreneurs are focusing on them in the geographies that we actually invest in, which is Europe, Israel, and the United States, and then convincing them that they should work with us because we're going to help them reinvent the industry. So the majority of it is actually proactive because at this point we've been around for over a decade and we've been pretty helpful to entrepreneurs, and part of it is making them loads of money or helping them make loads of money. We do get the entrepreneurs coming to see us. I wish they would come more, but it's not like Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is pretty artificial that way, where essentially the entrepreneurs come to see you. This is definitely more like the mountain comes to Mohammed.
And crudely, there's a hell of a lot more competition among investors even in Silicon Valley. So you have a more ripe pitch here, don't you?
That's right. I mean, there's definitely, most of our peers sort of see Europe as a museum and a fun place to come and hang out during the summer. They don't really see it as an incredibly sort of rich area to invest in startups. So we find ourselves being one of the few, certainly not the only VC. There are a lot of VCs doing great work here, but in relative terms to the VCs in Silicon Valley or China or India, there's a very few number of VCs focused on Europe. I think that's going to change, though, actually. I think that if you look at the New York sort of ecosystem, it's actually much closer to what you find in London or in Berlin than what you find in San Francisco or Silicon Valley. So I suspect that a lot of the VCs who focus on New York will end up focusing on Europe a lot more.
Given your nose for a good trend, what is it about working in the investment sector, apart from the money, rather than being an entrepreneur that inspires you?
Well, it's definitely not for the money. There are many more lucrative things to do than being a VC. I'm not complaining, but I can tell you it's definitely, the fact
Try
that
being
you're
a journalist.
for instance. Exactly. Although, journalists are reinventing themselves.
Yeah.
But essentially you have to bank on finding one great company that is going to make up for all the companies and all the businesses that you back that go nowhere. So it's definitely a high risk, high reward type of work. Why I'm not an operator? Probably because I wouldn't be very good at it. I think sort of operators are operators and VCs are VCs, and they're actually different skill sets. I mean, the things that you have to do as a venture capitalist are sort of the antithesis of what you have to do as an operator. In certain cases, as a venture capitalist, you have to decide we shouldn't put more money into this because it's going nowhere. And you have to convince the entrepreneur that we should shut down shop and try something new. If you're a great operator, you're not going to give up until the very, very last moment in time because you can already always reinvent yourself. I mean, Michael Smith of Mind Candy is a perfect example of that, where, had it not been for his type of stamina, he wouldn't have completely reinvented the company.
So dogged determination then.
Yeah. And really sticking to your guns through and through. Whereas sort of what a VC is supposed to do is at a certain point sort of say, look, we have to change directions, or we just have to call it quits. We love working with you, but time to move on, time to change completely what you're thinking about.
Who's really exciting you at the moment? What trends are particularly strong in Europe?
So, I mean, one of the trends that we invested in early and will continue to focus on is actually apparel. So fashion and apparel is probably going to make up a third of all of e-commerce, and it's in relative terms tiny still. We were fortunate enough to back ASOS and Net-a-Porter, and I know you met with Jose this morning at Farfetch. We think that that area is just getting started online, and actually Europe has many reasons why it's more likely to come out with the biggest companies than other geographies.
Well, something like 90% of fashion retail is still done in person, maybe
Right.
because you need the tactility of the fabrics.
Or maybe not. Or maybe not. I think that's going to change. I mean, I think that essentially what's going to happen is for most items of clothing, you're going to be comfortable buying them online and have a very simple way of and sort of seamless way of sending things back. But really, you're going to go into stores when you want the immersive experience and you want the curatorial help that the staff is going to give you. But I think most activity is going to be done online because it's just so much easier, it's cheaper. But the reason why I think the UK is probably going to come up with most of these disruptors is because the fashion industry in the UK and the retail industry is the most competitive on the globe. I mean, the reason why flash sales sites have never worked in the UK is because they get discounted in stores before you can actually react online. And so those trends are going to make the UK specifically a really, really exciting area for fashion and apparel.
Yes, right in the middle of the city, so excuse the sirens, but we have a very mature tech industry now. But what is it about the ecosystem here that is still lacking a bit? What would make us that much more competitive? And what can you do to provide that, I suppose?
So I think maybe some of the elements that still need to be fostered is sort of the fact that we find great entrepreneurs, but in order to make great businesses, we have to surround those entrepreneurs by very experienced operators. And people are still pretty risk averse here. So, they'll stay at Tesco or at Sky or at Marks and Spencer's for a lifetime, rather than deciding to actually pull out and join a startup and see what they can build, see if they can build the next Amazon or the next Google. That's culturally, changing that mindset of sort of looking for job security rather than sort of the entrepreneurial upside of being part of something that you create. Needs to be worked on.
Finding people that can operate a business at a certain scale as well is something we hear again and again.
Yeah, so I think that talent is certainly here. And interestingly, if you look at a company like Google, most of the management team actually came out of the UK team at this point. If you look at the people who are in Mountain View, most of them actually were here just a few years ago, and most of them are Brits or Brit background. So certainly, it's not a lack of talent. It's probably a mindset, sort of clicking from, staying at one of these FTSE 50 companies to joining an entrepreneur who really has this incredible idea that you can help build.
And lastly, what's the best kept secret in the London startup scene? What's the startup everyone loves but nobody's talking about?
That's a great
When
question.
I say everyone, I suppose I mean investors.
The best kept secret, so in other words, a startup that folks know about here but hasn't really hit the mainstream.
Well, I'm thinking recently I went to Stockholm and there's some amazing companies there who perhaps aren't promoting themselves.
I mean, the one that comes to mind, I think, for me, but maybe, it's probably in this vicinity, it's known super well, is moo.com, the Moo Cards guys. It's pretty incredible what they've built. This notion of actually starting with customized, individualized cards to expanding it into a business where, a lot of businesses, most of their business now is not just individuals, but businesses buying all their physical sort of contact information, all of that customized. I don't think people realize how significant.
Well, they're another index company as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
But you're taking a company like that out of the tech space and making it mainstream. That's the challenge for so many tech startups, isn't it? Any shortcuts to that?
Well, obviously work with VCs. That's
apart from that.
No, I think at this point, I think you have to be ruthlessly paranoid about what's happening on a global basis and really make sure that the approach that you're taking is dramatically different from everyone else, because startups can happen anywhere. Doesn't really take much cash or infrastructure to get started. So you have to be extremely honest on how differentiated your value proposition is from everyone else. Because that's sort of the most frustrating aspect is all these entrepreneurs who want to start something that is actually sort of incrementally different rather than joining other entrepreneurs and building something dramatically different.
So you've got to be ruthlessly paranoid and you've got to do something radically different. And that's an interesting combination. Danny, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.